TLS encryption is something we all heard about, but it's also something that we like to brush it off or swipe under the floor. We know that there is some sort of encryption. It's TLS, meaning that it's cool, or SSL, but we don't fully understand how it works, and we feel a bit afraid of it, because whenever you might look at TLS or SSL handshake, you can see 8-9 steps within one handshake, and it might be quite intimidating for you. So today we will be looking in detail how TLS/SSL handshake happens, and together we will understand what happens during this handshake, and by the end of the video you will see that it's actually not a difficult and quite an easy process to comprehend. To start with, why TLS/SSL, or why sometimes it's SSL, sometimes it's TLS? Well, to start with, SSL, it used to be an SSL handshake, and SSL deprecated. Some of the ciphers used within SSL got deprecated, they're no longer secure. That's why the newer version of SSL is TLS. It's true that normally you can often come across it's being called as SSL handshake, but realistically what people mean is TLS handshake, and the correct name of it is TLS handshake. So TLS handshake is a handy tool used with many important security protocols. One of them is HTTPS, which is the secure version of HTTP. Don't forget to check out my video on HTTP. These security protocols use TLS to build their security offering on. And the same stands for DNS over TLS. Let's go into the topic itself without too much words about how it happens, when it happens. Let's actually review what the handshake is. So it's true that handshake includes at least 7 steps, depending on how you look at it. Some of the guides, they combine 2 or 3 steps together. Some of the guides present all of the steps, but we can't go any lower than 7 steps in normal TLS handshake. And let's review why. So to start with, TLS handshake is based on TCP connection. Some people understand it as TLS using TCP, or TLS being used interchangeably as TCP, but that's not true. They operate on different levels. So in my video about OSI levels, if you watched it, you already know that there are several networking layers, and TCP operates on layer 4. So in order to make sure that the connection is reliable, there are no errors in the connection, TLS is based on TCP, on layer 4. So what it means? As a first step of TLS handshake, what we do is we establish TCP connection. Imagine this is a client, this is a user, it can be us, and this is a server. It's a web server, it can be google.com. I use Google quite a lot in my examples. I hope Google doesn't mind. So this is the client side and this is the server side. And in order to initiate the TCP connection, before actually TLS handshake starts, we start from the connection request to the server. Server sends the acknowledgement to us that the connection has been established, and the client sends acknowledgement to the server that the client received the acknowledgement. This is the 3-way handshake. Basically, client, let's start TCP connection. Server, okay, let's start it. And client, okay, acknowledged, we started it. This 3-way handshake makes sure that both client and server know that the connection has been established. So after these 3 steps, after TCP handshake, remember, not TLS handshake. TLS handshake are all of these steps. We're talking about TCP handshake. So TCP handshake happened, TCP connection, or the connection is established. Now we have the connection between the server and the client. What happens next? The next step is called client hello. That's the part of the TLS handshake. And you might wonder, what does it mean, client hello? It means that client says hello to the server in a very specific way. Client sends to the server the TLS version that it supports, the session ID of the sessions that they initiated. Remember, we just had a TCP handshake. And the cipher suits that the client supports. and the client random, the random string that is sent by the client to the server. So imagine I'm a client, right? We established the connection with the server, and I'm saying hello. In this hello, I'm telling the server TLS versions that I support, because maybe server supports the TLS version that I don't support, or the TLS version that has been deprecated, and I don't support it either because I don't support the version high enough or I don't support the deprecated versions. Meaning that I give server the idea of how our communication will proceed. And the very important point of this is that I also send the client random. So the 4 elements that we sent, the TLS version, the session ID, that this is our session ID, and this is my cipher suits, the client sends, that I support, and this is the client random. What is the cipher suit? You can look at it as an algorithm that is used to encrypt the communication. There are several different algorithms. In the same way that on TikTok, on Instagram, you can always see different ways of multiplication, how people do that. So for example, they can say in Japan, kids do the multiplication this way. They write one number here, another number there, and then they somehow have the rules to multiply it. Or in my school, we would just write 2 numbers, one under each other, and then do the multiplication. Just as with multiplication, there are different types, there are different algorithms of different cipher suits that are used to encrypt the communication. So as a client, I sent this information to the server. I sent the server client hello. Server receives it and sends me a server hello as a third step. So what server hello contains? In server hello, server sends us the TCL version that server supports, right? Supports, session ID, selected cipher, server certificate, and server random. This might be overwhelming, but let's actually look what server sends. Look at it in more detail. Imagine that client supports TLS version 1, 1.2, 1.3, right? And server says, okay, the TLS version that we will be using will be 1.2. We're responding it to the client. Second, server sends to the client the session ID. You might ask, why would server send to the client session ID again? Client already sent session ID. Why does he need to send it again? Well, this is the part of the security. Security mechanism is based overall, not only in TLS encryption, in life, everywhere, is based on no trust principle. So server doesn't trust the client. Realistically. That's why it sends the session ID again, in order to make sure that they have the same session IDs and there is no man in the middle. A client sent to the server the cipher suits. Imagine it support SHA, it support Diffie-Hellman, DH, in which case the server chooses one cipher that it also supports and sends it to the client, saying that, okay, I support SHA, let's go with it. The fourth thing that server sends to the client is server's public certificate. Server's public certificate is the certificate that validates the server's validity. So for example, if you're google.com, you install the security certificate on your domain. You go to your domain registrar and you install the certificate. So anyone to whom you give this public certificate will be able to verify that this is indeed the certificate installed on your domain. And the server sends it to the client. And server random. Again, the random string, and we will later find out why actually it sends the random string. Sent by the server to the client, same as the client sent it to server, but it's not the same random. Client sends one random and the server sends another random. These steps are clear, right? We established a TCP connection, client said hello, server said hello, and they exchanged the information, they reached an agreement. An agreement is reached between the server and the client. But does this mean that TLS connection has been established? No, we're still continuing. So once client received the server hello, the authentication occurs, meaning that they received the information from each other, they agreed on that information, and they have randoms, right? What happens next? They need to verify that the certificate that client received of the server is valid. So what does client do? Once they receive the certificate, the client, our browser, once it receives the certificate, it checks the certificate. First, it checks for its expiry, and second, it checks that the certificate belongs to a known certificate authority. Certificate authority is the authority that distributes the security certificates to the domain. You can understand it as the airport passport control. So passport control, when it's looking at your passport, it checks if the country that issued you a passport exists. If it's not like some, I'm from a Door Republic. Door Republic doesn't exist. So similar with the certificate authority. It's checking whether the certificate authority is a valid authority. And second, it checks the expiry. And same as at our passport control, our passports are checked for the expiry. In the same way. So client checked the server certificate, private certificate, it looks good. What server does? Client does. Client uses server's public certificate in order to encrypt the pre-master secret. When you look at the pre-master secret, please don't think that it's something that only browser knows or something only server knows, it's something intentional. No. Pre-master secret is more often than not is the random encrypted string. The main point is not the secret itself. The main point in this step is that this secret is encrypted by the server's public certificate. Meaning that when the client sends it to the server, server can only decrypt it with private certificate of the server. Server never distributes its private certificate. Only server has it. So this is the key that only server has. And if the pre-master key has been encrypted with server's public certificate, only server with its private certificate can decrypt that key. What does it mean? It means that if the pre-master key has been decrypted by the server's private certificate, it means that the server is authentic and it was indeed the server that did so. Once it's done, the client and the server, once it's done successfully, of course, create a session key. And they exchange the session keys, meaning that TLS handshake has been completed basically on the security side. And they send the finished message to each other and exchange the session keys. Usually the session keys, what it means, you might see at the moment that the server sends the public certificate to the client and client sends the pre-master key so that server can decrypt it using its private certificate. And it can be like cumbersome. Server sends public certificate, then it uses its private certificate to decrypt it. So this is quite an overhead, no? In order to send one certificate, then decrypt it. So this is asymmetric public key cryptography, meaning that they use one public key and one private key in order to establish the connection. However, there is a lot of overhead. How rational it is to do this asymmetric cryptography handshake each time we visit Google, each time we search something on Google. This is not rational. So what they do at this step, at step 8, they create a symmetric key that is the same for the server and for the client, and they exchange this key in order to create a connection. Once they exchange the session key, they send finished message to each other, meaning that the connection has been established, and now the user can browse the website given that TLS connection has been established and the connection is secure. It might look quite cumbersome to you, but actually our browser and server accomplish this in milliseconds. We don't even notice. We just go to google.com and we know that the connection is secure. Let's go over it once more very quickly to make sure that we understood what's going on. So first and foremost, we established a TCP connection. Three-way handshake, meaning that our connection is persistent. We have the connection between each other and we can now actually communicate using that connection. Second, client says hello. So this is what I support. This is the TLS versions that I support, this is our session ID, and these are the cipher suites that I support, and this is the client random. It's the same as when you try to find a job. This is my CV, this is the programs that I can work with, this is the occupations that I know something about, and etc. Client says hello. Third step, server says hello. Server responds to the client that, okay, this is the TLS that we're gonna use. This is the ciphers that we're gonna use because you said that you support it. This is the session ID, and this is my public certificate. And fifth, this is the server random. After the authentication occurred and they said hello to each other, pre-master secret is generated. So I forgot to add that in order to generate pre-master secret, the client uses pre-master secret, the random string, client uses client random, and client uses server random. So all of this is used in order to generate a pre-master secret. That's why you might now understand why we actually were sending client random and server random, in order to create a key, because server random and client random are known by the server itself. So server can actually create the pre-master key on its own and to double check if it's the real pre-master key. And client sends it to server. Server decrypts it with private certificate and looks at it. Okay, this is the pre-master secret. Does it contain the client randoms that client sent it to me earlier? Yes. Does it contain the server random? Yes. It means that the client is genuine. Because what could have happened? There would be the man in the middle. Imagine I'm in the man in the middle. I just, off the top of my head, put server and client randoms together and send it to server. Server decrypts it, and server is like, oh my god, this is not the randoms that we exchanged during server hello and client hello. No, that's why this connection is not genuine and TLS handshake doesn't happen. You know what I mean? So these randoms play an important role in the TCP handshake. Once it's done, they create an identical session key. So there is no need for one private key, one public key. Once they do that, they create the identical key, which is the symmetric public key cryptography. And they shake hands. They say, okay, perfect. Now we have the identical keys in order to establish connection. Again, why? In order to avoid overhead. Otherwise, it would be so cumbersome to have private key, public key, and do this all over and over again while we're surfing the internet. Once the session key is exchanged, they send finished message to each other in order to complete the handshake process. This might seem complex. However, once you understand why each step is done, you will be able to sort of comprehend the importance and the logical flow of TLS handshake. Why we're sending TLS versions, why there is client hello, why there is server hello, why we send client random. Nothing in this handshake is done just for the sake of doing it. It's a very smart flow actually of steps that ensures that the correct security is established, that it's actually a server that we know, it's Google.com, the servers that we want to access, and the browser who is genuinely accessing that server, that is, this connection is between. Why? Well, you might ask why everything is so complicated. Well, imagine you're paying for something. You're entering your bank details, you're entering your address, your sensitive information. You wouldn't want someone to reveal this information, to steal this information, would you? That's why the correct security is very important. And as these bad actors get more sophisticated, the TLS handshake got more and more sophisticated by every year. Maybe before it was just 3 steps, 2 steps, but now it's a whole mechanism to ensure that our connection is secure. Well, there are a couple of things that I want to mention on top of what we have discussed within the handshake. We already said that it uses TCP at layer 4. TCP is not a security protocol, TCP is simply a reliable protocol that allows us to establish reliable connection. So imagine you want to buy a car, and you want to buy a car that is very secure against a tornado, against etc. It will be a very specialized car. So if you buy just a Volvo car, which is a reliable car make, it doesn't mean that it's a secure car as such. It's a reliable car, but it doesn't mean that it will protect you against hurricane, against flooding, and against different calamities, right? TCP is not a security protocol. It's just a reliable protocol that is used at TLS Handshake. TLS cannot afford using unreliable protocols. That's why it goes for TCP. It uses asymmetric public key cryptography, meaning that there is a public key and there is a private key. Private key is owned only by the server itself, whereas public key can be distributed to encrypt something so that only server can decrypt it. Symmetric public key cryptography is when there is only one key. Right? There is no public and private key. There is one key, and it is used at the TLS handshake when they exchange the identical keys. Imagine how complex this handshake is. It's using both asymmetric one and symmetric key cryptography. So it's actually very exciting when you look at it. Some variations of TLS handshake steps can vary when certain cipher suites are used. The very loud example is Diffie-Hellman algorithm. I'm sure it doesn't support either asymmetric or symmetric public key cryptography. That's why the steps are a bit shorter for Diffie-Hellman. Diffie-Hellman is not commonly used cipher suite. That's why we're not looking at steps that relate to specifically Diffie-Hellman. But if you're interested, you can Google it and do your own research. It's not much different from what we've discussed, but there are some differences still. If we go for TLS 1.3 version, it reduces the number of cipher suites supported. Because TLS 1.3 is at the moment one of the latest and strongest versions of TLS, it doesn't support the deprecated cipher suites. Cipher suites that have been involved in any security breach have been announced as deprecated for TLS 1.3. So if in your TLS handshake the client and server uses the TLS 1.3 version, it means that you have the most secure variation of the TLS handshake. I hope now TLS Handshake has a clearer picture for you and you better comprehend what is actually involved in the steps of the handshake. Thank you for being with me today, and in order to make YouTube algorithm notice my videos better, please don't forget to like this video, to subscribe, and in the comment section below leave your thoughts on what technical videos you would like to see in the future. I get a lot of my ideas from you, and I really appreciate to see what you think and what topics are of most interest for you that you would like to see on my channel. Thank you for being with me today, and bye bye.